So good evening, everyone. We're really excited to kind of walk through some of the designs that have been developed over the last several months. And before we do that, I wanted to take you back in time just a little bit to talk about what led up to the bond proposal and a little bit about the scope and design, and then we're going to jump into that. And we're really honored that we have, I think, over 100 different teachers in the district that have been part of this design. We're going to be going through it in as much detail as possible, but it's also a great example of how, even in a time of uncertainty, the district has remained future focused during the last several months. And so I hope you're going to be as excited as we are as we kind of go through this. We have our building principals, we have learning services and others here to present and kind of walk us through this. So just really quickly, I want to remind everyone, the board and anybody listening at home, where we started. And it was really with the strategic plan that moved into a scope and design process to review the facilities. And we had several people come into that process, teachers, community members, various stakeholders that gave input into building up that bond proposal. And it was right around this time, probably within a week or two, that we landed in on that final design. Pat came into the district just at the key moment. We were stuck on just a last couple decisions that we needed to make. We were able to put that together. And then the board, shortly after, you voted on the resolution to move forward with a bond. And so these are those topics. We spent a lot of bit of time on that, and we haven't had a real comprehensive update in terms of the design process because we've been in the middle of that process. So that's what tonight is for, is to kind of walk you through what some of those plans are going to look like, as well as just become a little bit more familiar with how it's starting to take shape and evolve. So I'm going to turn it over to the rest of the team, and I think somebody is probably already on. So if we can go to the next slide, we're probably ready to get started.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. I think that's me. Hello, everyone. It's Paul Corneliuson with French Associates Architects. It's good to see you folks again, and the new board members, welcome. And we're honored to be part of this presentation for you this evening. Just to go back a little bit in history, we've been very busy the last 4 months. We started this adventure back in September, and we had a series of planning sessions that we organized with sort of canned agendas of things we wanted to listen and learn about on a variety of topics. And we typically try to break this planning process down into subject matter so that we can, focus on that for that session and really make ourselves productive. And so you can see the list on the left there. We've met with a variety of people, hundreds of teachers and staff, and it has been an incredible process. And I personally want to compliment your middle school principals. Those fellas have been great as a sounding board. They've choreographed the right people to attend these sessions. They're very intuitive, and I think you'll learn, and see how many fingerprints are on these plans, so to speak, when they start their presentation. I'm going to walk through on the next slide. I'm going to show you, or I guess give you a little bit of a lay of the land there on where we sit with both South Hills Middle School and North Hills. This first slide, we'll start at South Hills, and just for a little bit of orientation, a little architecture 101, we're going to be focusing on two types of drawings. There's a floor plan drawing on the left that's got a bunch of colored boxes in it, and then a site plan drawing on the right. And we've got some building statistics, if you will, for the moment that give you a sense of how big these facilities are. We're talking about, 155,000 square feet of middle school at the South Hills site, which is pretty exciting, which includes about 40,000 square feet of new construction. So you can see percentage-wise what the new impact is going to be on the site. On the site plan, on the lower right, we usually try to start there because that's the overall aerial. We've got some rendering illustrations that'll round out the presentation, but that gives you an aerial view of the improvements that we're contemplating. based on the input and feedback from the participants. But some of the big ideas, we want to make sure that we redesign the traffic safety on the sites. Bus traffic is separate from auto traffic. Never the two shall cross. That's our mantra. If we can get to that goal. Parking is improved. Parking is increased. We've looked at the improvement in athletic fields. We're reorganizing tennis courts, turf field at the competition stadium, and we're having a lot of discussion on outdoor learning opportunities as well outdoor wellness opportunities. So we're starting to look at walking trails through the site as well, in the connection to the elementary school. But those might be opportunities for outdoor activities, which would be very, very clever. And as you know, if you know the site with the water feature there too, some great opportunities for outdoor learning. Back to the floor plan, the drawing on your left. So it's a series of boxes. The different colors generally represent different categories within the building, and those are those topics that we shared with you on that previous slide. So, for example, everything on the far left, that muted green color, that's everything with athletics. That's the existing competition gym. That's the existing field house. The blue area in the front is the new administrative offices. So that's the new front door, if you will, as you come into this facility. We've overlaid safety and security measures. We've developed a secure vestibule concept that makes sure that a guest coming into the building is checked in appropriately. As you get into the heart of the building, the yellow box is the media center, the reimagined media center, I might say. And in both cases, both at North Hills and South Hills, the media center really is a beacon at the center point of the buildings. And it becomes an opportunity to witness that beacon right when you come into the front door. And in the case of South Hills, we actually see some opportunities that media center can kind of spill out into that courtyard that exists at the front door. All of the lighter aqua colored rooms are the general purpose classrooms. These buildings are organized into 3 distinct learning communities. Okay, these are most likely grade level communities that would be 6th, 7th, and 8th. And what's interesting at South Hills is that you're working with existing rooms, and so we can't provide new construction for every location. We got to work within the walls that we're given, but we've had some clever thoughts on how to remove some walls and create some collaboration zones, as well some opportunities to deploy the administrative staff functions out into these learning communities. On the lower right, we've got, and it shows up in sort of a crosshatched pattern. That's the largest new construction at South Hills, and that is the new Auditoria, as we're calling it, as well the music suite. So a lot of fun new construction there that the principals will talk about in a few minutes. And then rounding out the rest of the plan, because I don't want to steal their thunder, in those pink areas, we've got some of the FACS classrooms, the art rooms, things like that. I think I'd like to go to the next slide here, Dave. Thank you.
Yeah,
this should be.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries. Now we're on North Hills, so the old Lasser High School, and being reimagined and opened up, blowing out the dust, so to speak, and getting ready for the new reimagined North Hills Middle School. Again, the site plan is kind of an aerial view in the lower left there, and we are again overlaying the principles of separation of bus traffic from car traffic. On the Lasser site, or the old Lasser site, we're actually removing the drive that was temporarily built for the transition for the new high school. And that is going to allow us to reimagine the whole athletics opportunities at North Hills. And so we don't take, or we're taking away that interaction between pedestrian traffic and the car loop traffic. So now the athletics zone is purely pedestrian, which makes it a lot safer. Yeah, again, some of the statistics here. This is a very big site, a little larger because we've got some additional components like the existing auditorium here. But we're looking at almost 90,000 square feet of new construction, which is going to be very impactful. Again, just to give you a quick lay of the land, we kind of call the transition zone the big wedge, and that is the yellow zone in the middle. That is actually the media center. And so the point of that wedge is the new main entry point at North Hills. And that blue zone is the administrative offices. So that is the gatekeeper. That's the front door as you enter this site. The auditorium zone, if you're familiar with the building, stays as is. That is also the music suite in that lower left corner. And then the pink areas round out the visual arts components. The existing gymnasiums, if you're familiar, are going to remain. They will be remodeled, and the natatorium as well. And I think the principals will talk a little bit more in detail about those. On the far right, that's the primary addition, and that includes the new 3 learning communities for the grade level assignments. Also includes our special ed components, and they're laid out very nicely. So that will actually occur to the north of that existing footprint. So I hope that gives you a general lay of the land, and I think we're going to sort of like magnify each of these areas and let the principals do their thing.
Thank you, Paul. What a privilege to be here tonight. We couldn't be more excited to share the work that we've been doing. And it's been a great partnership with Paul and Suzanne from French and Daryl from Barton Mallow coming together. And they've really listened to us and as we've imagined what this can be. And what a great slide to kind of begin, instruction leading construction. At the heart, that sanctity of teaching and learning is really what we're all about. And to really dial into what it can be for a 6th, 7th, and 8th grade school community is super exciting. So very thankful for this. And, I'm a process guy. It's been a very good process from the beginning, as Paul outlined, in terms of being able to kind of hear the needs and really think of and reimagine what schooling can be. And, here we are in the middle of a pandemic, already forced to reimagine, and then yet at the same time, even a more forward-thinking vision as Todd outlined earlier. So very excited, and it's been an evolving process and something that we want to share a little bit more. So I'm going to turn it over to Jen Perrone from Special Ed, and she can share how the vision moved in that direction as we realized quickly that the support that we can provide for all our students is critical.
Thank you, Jason. And to echo Jason's comments, I'm very excited to be here tonight and present some of our early thinking around the design work for special education. But before I jump into any details, I really want to give a huge shout out to our middle school administrators. As we entered into this work, they spoke with a unified voice about how special education really needed to be a priority in our design work and the importance of integration. And we all agreed that we needed to begin with special education and then build all of the other programs around it. And you'll see how some of that has come into play in the designs that you'll see tonight. And it's that philosophy that led us to start with special education this evening. So you'll see on the left is South Hills Middle School. All of the darker blue areas are the areas that are housing all of our special education programs, specifically for self-contained. Don't pay too attention to the labels. We've been making changes and edits even up to today. So some of this, how it's laid out right now and some of the labeling is not completely accurate. But what you'll see is that both with the resource room programs and all of our self-contained programs, everything is completely integrated right with the general education classes. Everything has been laid out to allow for easy access. We're incorporating exercise rooms into each of the middle schools, as opposed to calling them sensory rooms. And we're doing that based on a lot of evidence-based research that really shows the importance of focusing on lifelong skills of exercising for students. And we're also hoping that that really works towards leading us into doing some unified sports with our students as well. And then just incorporating that into the programming. And then in North, you'll see the same thing. All of the special education programs, both resource and self-contained, have all been laid out really at what we kind of call the base of the fingertips of each of the learning communities there. So the students have easy access to all of the other general education peers. And as we grow those peer-to-peer programs and those students are integrated with their general education peers in those classrooms more and more, it will become very seamless in how they're participating with each other. And I believe we're turning it over. Who's talking next?
Yeah, I have a little bit more, Jen.
Okay. Thanks, Jason.
Yeah. And so on the other view here of the learning community, that notion of community is critical at our level and really through the educational experience for kids. And our district, in framing out our work and how we encourage that true sense of belonging, this design supports that. One of the things at our level, we've had the benefit of working with upper elementary. So, thinking about that transition and what it will feel like to have sixth graders come into this building. And then we also have the benefit of seeing those students grow and become the high schoolers in their time here in our district. But yet we're blessed with this special phase. And you hear it frequently from middle school, middle level educators. It's just a special group, and it's a special staff that sees that this age can be what it can be. And so that grade level design is critical. And you'll see, in those peninsulas, the fingers at North, or in the way that the wings are laid out in South, that supports that kind of true identity and coming together at the grade level and allows us to focus in on that approach. And with that, instructionally, the teamwork and the design is inherent. And I know later in our presentation, some of the concepts and philosophies associated with that will be described further. But the way we lay out a building facilitates that. That's a huge part of how learning is achieved, is the environment in which it takes place. And we've had a generous community that's going to allow us to create that setting at this level. That integration Jen spoke to, and then of course, in a second here, maybe with the next slide, Dave, I can kind of speak to some common areas in collaboration at North Hills. So here is like toward the bottom and to the right is one of those wings at North Hills, and then up in the top and the left are those support services that Jen outlined. And a design that in some ways is very familiar as you think about the high school, and you can see like some spaces are designed to be two learning spaces that then can become one in a larger space, but also the use of the hallway. I'm here at East Hills tonight, and I think about just the way our students have spread out over the years, and to be able to make learning happening and fit in all the spaces that children at this age like to use is really exciting to have that possibility in our near future. And so as you see that sort of laid out, there's many kind of collaborative opportunities that you can get that real close connection to support services. And I think as was shared by Paul, I believe, maybe having our counseling support right there to meet the needs of kids. And so this design is really something that we're very much looking forward to as we grow into it. And I believe Randy's going to jump in and speak a little bit about how that same approach would work at South Hill.
Thank you, Jason. So these meetings have been so exciting, and I think the theme that you're going to hear tonight is a lot of thanks and appreciation. So before I get into the design of this, we really wanted to extend an additional thank you to Barton Mallow to French and Associates. These individuals, the full design team, have come to us on a regular basis. Paul referenced this in the beginning. All the individual meetings that we've had with either core teachers or elective teachers or support staff members, every step of the way, as new ideas surface, the design team have really renovated some of these plans, redesigned them, and moved them in a way that are most purposeful for our students. So this image right here is the back of the current BHMS site. For those of you that are familiar with the building, to the topmost portion of this image is where our current 5th grade students would be. The lower portion of this left-hand side is where our 6th grade students would be. And the brilliance of the design, whether we're talking about South Hills or North Hills, is just really threefold. It's designated learning hubs, or these zones, these designated communities. It's flexible spaces for multiple use. And then it's building in these collaborative spaces, whether they're for smaller groups or larger groups. So if you look in some of these sections, you're going to see that we have roughly 8 classroom spaces that can be utilized per grade level. Within there, there's removable walls that help us in a variety of ways. When we talk about the flexibility of use, you think about the opportunity for different subject areas to work together, science labs, maybe even bringing in presenters. Other areas that we'd like you to take notice of are these common areas that could be used, these collaborative spaces, very similar to the front portion of Bloomfield Hills Middle School right now, or peppered throughout East Hills, West Hills, and BHMS, which we've referred to as gateway spaces. These are becoming more popular areas within our schools for our students, little breakout areas, whether it's small group or large group. You'll also notice inside of the image here that our courtyard space, where the trees are in the middle of this image, that has reduced our courtyard to half the space, and taking advantage of that central area where Jennifer Perone had talked about having more support services that are localized and per grade level. So just a fascinating design, as we've talked about the multi-uses of these spaces, it's just really exciting to think what our students at the middle school level are going to be able to have per wing and in their own common area, their own little nest or hub, which has been really, really exciting. So if you want to take us to the next image. Our media centers and collaborative spaces, we've been saying that this is really the hub of our building. And what's really exciting about both buildings is you enter the main corridor, these are going to be predominant spaces that really stand out. Each one coming with their own unique parts to them. At the current Bloomfield Hills Middle School site, or South Hills Middle School, you're going to see that the central location of this media center is banked up against a courtyard space. And just the multiple uses that we could have with that, I'm going to be talking in a little bit, so I'm going to hold off on the outdoor spaces and how we're connecting that. But how unique these designs are, where we can take indoor spaces and outdoor spaces and incorporate them. Same thing at the North Hills site, the media center, again, being the hub of the building, centrally located, really close to those core academic areas, close to those support areas, but in a way that has a lot of great sight lines, great flow to the building. We know that there's going to be a lot of tech integration, and again, collaborative spaces, smaller group areas where students can work together. Just really excited about how these designs are coming together and how they're going to support a variety of things, from design and tech and our STEM and STEAM programs, all the various things that have been so important to the learning of our students are being incorporated not just smaller spaces, but again, this learning hub that's in the middle of the building. So in the next slide, and I believe Mr. Shulkin, you're going to be taking that on, but I spoke to the thanks of French and Associates and as well as Barton Mallow, but I really want to thank Dave Shulkin and the entire IT team. we have been sitting in these meetings, elbow to elbow, just thinking about the different ways that we could design the spaces, while IT has been thinking nonstop, what innovative ways can we bring technology to life for our students? So, Dave, thank you and the team for everything that you've been doing, and I'll pass this slide on to you.
Wow, that's a lot of love, Randy, and I always appreciate it. And the team does too. Well, these are the fun, exciting things that we absolutely love to dig into. These are problems to solve. And if you think about the buildings that we're talking about, and as it starts to come together, the challenges we have is we have new spaces, but we're also renovating old spaces. And so how do we deal with technology? And if you think about that electricity that was put in these buildings are from the 1950s. So you barely could have a hot plate, let alone a computer and a display and on and on and on. And so when we think about our classroom technology, and we talk about specifically the kind of future proofing or future planning, we're thinking about these things because we know within 10 years, much of the tech that we're putting in this bond right now is going to be refreshed. It may not even be the exact same stuff we put in today that we'll be putting in a couple of years or refreshing it within the decade. But it's also important to understand when we talk about technology, it's easy to look at stuff that goes on there. But as you know, our motto for the people who've been around, our motto is people, process, then we talk about that stuff. And so we look at educator input, and we've been thinking about this for many, many years. We talk about the gateway spaces at the middle schools, moving into the high school and what that looked like on steroids. And then of course, looking at our elementary and then of course the middle school specifically. But I want to keep this is an important point to understand. When we talk about technology, we're talking about lighting management. That's both the artificial light that we put in there, but also the ambient light coming in. How does that affect the technology and the humans in there? We're talking about our sound management, our video management, the user interaction, both our little ones and our taller ones, right? So do you have a display? You don't want to have a display that fits me, as you know, I'm a little bit taller, or my little ones who are in kindergarten trying to touch that screen and interact with it. So we kind of have to think about those kinds of things. So those ergonomics come in there, the electrical management that goes in there, the cabling, you're going to trip over it as you walk or have reading time on the mat. And so all of these things are being talked about, thought about. And then as we kind of launch our pilot groups and our focus groups, we're going to get that input from our teachers as well. And so this is just a quick mock-up of what we're thinking about in those rooms and how do we put some tech and build out architectural kind of components to that and how we can kind of future plan so that tech changes, we can add, subtract, and integrate with those pieces. All right, so that's my piece. Next slide, outdoor learning environments.
All right, it's back to me. We had a lot of fun with the conversations revolving around the outdoor learning environments. As you can imagine, a lot of the conversations had been around just the interior spaces and what was working at each building, what wasn't working, and then how we could modify that to give the best possible learning environments for our students. But then we shifted gears and we started to talk about all the opportunities that we have in the surrounding areas around each of our buildings. You think about Orange Lake, if you think about the wetland areas between BHMS and Conant right now, each of these areas come with prime opportunities, especially the way the new designs are being built out for outdoor learning spaces for our students. So I say we had a lot of fun with this because you can see 4 stars that are highlighted at South Hills Middle School as well as North Hills Middle School. And most of those are right outside of those learning hubs or those learning areas. So having a potential learning space for 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, something that's off of each media center. But then we started talking as a team and identifying different stars that could go in different locations. And by the time we were done, we couldn't even really see the outline of the buildings because we had so many opportunities for us to extend learning from the building, outside the building, and in a variety of ways. Canopied areas where we didn't have to worry about the elements, just natural spaces where we could step outside of the classroom and extend learning into the fresh air. Just a lot of really creative thinking around what we could do with spaces both inside the building and out. So as you can see, some of the guiding viewpoints, it was about accessibility, making sure that it was connected to the learning spaces, never forgetting about play and exploration. One thing that we've really learned at our middle school levels is the unique nature in which we have fourth and fifth grade or fifth grade built into these buildings, and making sure that we never lose sight of those play and exploration areas. Always thinking about the health and wellness of our school and our grounds, and how we take care of both. The existing landscape and what we could do to modify things. And as I mentioned before, just covered areas where we don't have to worry about the elements, and to be able to use those spaces throughout the year. So I believe at this time, I'm going to be turning it over to Mr. Geniak, which is going to be telling us a little bit about the performing arts.
Thank you, Randy. It's so incredible to watch, like, the dream of the past several years, as we've done all these different field trips and looking at different communities and what they've been able to do to enhance their programming, and to look at within these plans to see how they've evolved with all the voices that have been involved in the process. It shows the investment, almost like that reinvestment we're going to have in our performing arts, our STEAM, and this particular part of the building, or these portions of the buildings, both at South Hills and North Hills, demonstrate that investment. So as Paul had referenced, when you look at these purple areas, the purple areas show the auditorium. So if we start in the top, let's start actually at the bottom there, where North Hills. Some people may be familiar with the existing auditorium. That is being completely renovated. The shell is remaining, but you have a high school auditorium that is going to be revamped. And when we say that, we're not just talking about seats and flooring and those types of things, but you think about how technology has changed and how there's such a STEAM element in the auditorium. And for many students, that becomes their connection. And when they get an opportunity at the middle school level to play around with the junior varsity version of the technology that is going to mirror and scaffold them to the high school, it's pretty remarkable. So you have that fully functioning auditorium there at North Hills. There's designated space for the band, orchestra, choir. All of these voices have been a part of our discussions. So when you're looking at that at North Hills and you move over to South Hills, this wasn't a high school. There wasn't a high school auditorium. However, on the left side of that top right corner image there, that floor plan, you can see the current cafetorium, as I don't know if that's a real word or not, but it's definitely labeled outside of this space. The left side there shows the existing cafetorium, which now becomes a choir room and a drama room. And so you think about, well, where are the performances happening? That's that line, that diagonal line space to the right is a new band and orchestra room at the bottom. But really the featured part there is the auditoria. And so it's kind of interesting when you think of those two words I just used, the cafetorium or the auditoria, and you go back to one of those first slides where it's the instruction leading construction. What is that space really? What's the purpose of that space? And when you hear cafetorium, I hear cafeteria first. It's where people eat lunches. That's not necessarily the instructional part. One might argue there's a lot of social learning, of course, that goes on there, but it's not the instruction. The instruction is what happens in an auditorium. And so when you think of that auditoria, and there's an image there to the in the top middle of what it could look like. And Dave, if you jump to the next slide, I think it's even, yes, there you go. It's really either one of those. So yeah, either one of those really captures the essence of this space, this auditoria. So if you notice, it really does look like an auditorium right now because chairs are set up. If you look closely, and Dave, if you jump to that other image of from the other angle there, you can see that there's tiered seating that occurs here. So these are actually like 3 different levels of large open space, and they're not fixed chairs or fixed seating. This is actually where lunch would occur. You would have these spaces cleared out and tables and different seating for lunchtime at the middle school. But when it comes to actual performances, opportunities to engage with the technology in this space, it can take on the view of what would be over at North Hills as well, where it truly becomes an auditorium, and it's not an auditoria or an auditorium, not the cafetorium that exist at the current middle schools. So very much excited about the opportunities that this brings to our performing arts programs. When I think about what our district will have for our elementary students, they're going to have at the elementary buildings either a stage or this multi-purpose room, which the design will be happening in the months to come on those. But that will progress to these two incredible spaces that will be found at our middle schools, which then in turn are going to feed our students right up to the high school, where you have just a state-of-the-art, top-notch facility there in the auditorium that exists at Bloomfield Hills High School. So that reinvestment is a big thing, and again, being able to treat these spaces as STEAM spaces as well. So Dave, if you'd continue on here. And really, when you get at the heart of what middle school is all about, it's about kids finding themselves. It is, in my opinion, it is the most fun age to work with, because you never know what you're getting. You get the little kid one day, and then you get this young adult the next from the same kid. And part of what we do at our middle schools is, nurturing that exploratory element of finding out who they are and finding their passions, and requiring them to take certain electives so that they're exposed to so many different opportunities that we can provide. And as they progress through the levels at middle school, they begin to specialize a little bit, knowing that those opportunities and pathways that exist at the high school are awaiting them at the high school. So when you look at both of these spaces, you can see all the labels that are on there. The FACS stands for Family and Consumer Science. And so things like nutrition, cooking, the design element that goes into that work. The design cycle is at the core of much of what we're doing in these spaces, where kids are investigating and designing, creating, and evaluating. You can see that happening throughout these different areas. So when you see the 3D, 2D, the art rooms, the world language is apparent there on the South Hills, where there is different space at North Hills for those. So again, providing kids that chance to explore that, and the comprehensive programs that we have at our middle school level, I think really sets the stage for when they get to high school and get to enjoy the opportunity of, hey, I can really dig even at a deeper level here, if art becomes their passion, or if drama, band, orchestra, any one of these things. It really is that scaffold from the elementary to the high school in helping them figuring out who they are. So we're excited that we're going to have the spaces to really facilitate that. And I think at this point, I'm handing it off. I believe Sarah Fairman is going to jump in.
Thank you, Andy. It's nice to see you. Thank you, everyone, for letting us present. We are excited to talk about the spaces, but also to talk about the learning that will happen within those spaces. And so what we wanted to talk about was, one of our strategic goals is to provide an educational experience where all learners are empowered to reach their unique potential, reflecting the Bloomfield Hills portrait of a learner. So the goal is to have these instructional practices that are in these spaces be as transformative as the buildings themselves. As you have seen, these buildings are amazing in terms of how they meet the needs of middle school students and middle school learners, which is a very different and unique group. As Andy said, they are probably my favorite group to teach as well, just because there is so much change that happens and so much energy that they bring to the school. And we want to make sure that the building reflects their desires, their needs, and also their energy. So this includes the building blocks, which you see on this page here, of fundamental sound design in terms of curriculum and instruction and learning experiences. So taking the 9 core principles and pedagogies that you see on the screen, we are going to start to work with small teams in terms of building these learning experiences that actually both mirror and enhance the new instructional spaces that we're going to have. This emphasis on instruction will allow the district to further develop the objectives laid out with a strategic plan that you see on the right. And then, as Jason mentioned, the layout of a building impacts how students interact with each other. This also applies to the design of curriculum. It influences how students interact with the content. It influences how students interact with their skills. It influences how they interact with each other. So we are excited as a learning services team to work with middle school teachers and their teams to develop these learning experiences that meet and match the incredible spaces that we're going to be a part of. So this is the how or the why of what we want to do. And then Susan, who is coming up after me, is going to talk about how we are going to actually work in a co-constructive space to develop that new curriculum.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm not sure if everyone can hear me.
We can.
Oh, good. So it's been fun to listen and watch the excitement grow across this slide deck. And you've heard many times the mention of how the spaces open up so many different opportunities of collaboration, of hands-on, of exploratory types of learning. So as you heard Sarah reference, in the next month or two, we will be putting out a posting internally looking for some innovation teacher teams who are interested in developing those core launch learning experiences so that when we get into these spaces, we're really expanding out and using those spaces in new ways. In the images, you've seen technology, you've seen spaces that can be flexible, as Andy had said multiple times. We have spaces that can all of a sudden maybe be a STEM or a STEAM space. So if we have that kind of flexibility, how do we build the learning to be experiential and hands-on and stretching into those spaces? So this slide is really laying out that process of how we're going to be looking for teams who want to dig in and do some research, who want to create something cutting edge, innovative, that really sets the core across 6-8, across all classrooms. And how that will work its way through to where it becomes showcase, where the community is invited in to see that what kind of learning is happening, and how this really becomes a continuous cycle where we're studying and constantly innovating with that space. So it's very exciting to think about the kinds of instructional design we are now able to really stretch into. And I'm going to pass it on.
Wow, this is really exciting stuff. And as I was approaching my slide, I was just thinking about, geez, who do I thank? And I would like to thank everybody for being a part of learning from what we went through at the high school. And Dave Shulkin and I were obviously a big part of that design and that whole process. And that's an amazing building. It's an amazing facility. But of course, there was things that we thought we could have done better after that building opened. And all of those areas that we thought we could do better, we've done better and with this successful bond program. So I thank everybody for putting up with all of our little pushing and pulling and giving and taking and forcing and welcoming. It's really been incredible. So anyway, athletics. Both North Hills and South Hills will end up with a turfed indoor field house. North Hills is done already, but unfortunately we're going to have to close that during construction. So we do have a bit of a void there. And we are actually talking to East Hills Middle School and West Hills Middle School about doing a pull-ahead project and turfing those facilities before we really get into turning those into elementary schools, because in the bond, there is turf for those two field houses. Looking at the right upper picture there at South Hills Middle School, it's likely they're going to get 6 new repositioned tennis courts, the artificial turf exterior field, and like Andy had mentioned earlier, this was a middle school site and it still is. And then if you look below there, you see North Hills Middle School, which of course was formerly a high school site. So there's some features there that we just can't duplicate at South Hills. But it's got the existing track, the existing Dowk field with the artificial turf, the existing varsity baseball field. And that other field that's kind of like looking down at the bottom of the screen, that is a repositioned like girls softball field, community field. That is currently kind of a parking lot area in that rear access drive. Below that, you see 6 new tennis courts, but please don't fall in love with those. Those probably won't be there. We'll probably resurface the tennis courts that are located behind Dowk Field and increase the parking in the front of that building. Next slide. The Auditorium, this is really cool for several reasons. One, we're able to reuse the existing shell that was the old pool. 2, we're able to keep all the promises that we made to the community when we passed the bond. 8 competition lanes, a diving well, and community access. If you look to the left of the lanes, you will see kind of a strange area with little dots in it. That is the community access area. It's a 0 entry, it's wheelchair accessible. That's in a different well, so that water can be kept at a different temperature, so you can keep the competition side cooler than the community side. I was telling Todd one day, just envision you've got the diving board roped off and kids are diving for an open swim. You've got lanes identified and people are swimming laps for exercise. And then you've got some moms with toddlers and dads with toddlers in that warmer body of water. And you have, people with disabilities that need access at 0 entry in that same space. And it truly is a community space with community access that can be accessed during the day without traveling through the middle school. Next slide. Oh, and then I should also say, we met with the swim boosters and they had some requests as well, and we were able to meet some of those. One was the east-west orientation, so you can watch swimming, left to right instead of forward and aft. And they wanted pool deck expansion for competitions, to have more swimmers on the deck, and we were able to do that as well. Next slide. So a quick schedule update. The Losser abatement bid has been awarded and the asbestos abatement is underway. The demolition bid has been accepted and we are vetting that out and we'll bring that to the board in a couple of weeks. And that's the selective demolition for the interior of the building. So some of those spaces get torn down completely, like some of the corridors, but then many of the spaces get kind of gutted to be repurposed. And then some have very minor demolition. We've been through the conceptual estimates, and that's just weighing the additional square footage budgets versus the level of renovation budgets for the remaining square footage, and that continues to be right on target. So then, finishing up this month, we've got design development phase, and then we'll have the north and south design development estimates in February. And then we start going through the bidding process. And then super exciting, in April, we'll be kicking off the elementary school design. Don't forget, at the fall of 23, all this reconfiguration takes place. Then we start awarding bids, in the summertime, and at some time we'll be, doing some sort of formal groundbreaking and really celebrating what we've come up with. Next slide. Quick construction update. So Andy was talking about the auditorium at Losser. If you look on the right there, that is the tented asbestos flooring. All that seating has been removed, just finished up yesterday. Today they started tearing out the actual asbestos tile. Then they'll be grinding off the asbestos adhesive. We've completed all the site surveys, soil borings at north. We do soil borings to dig down in the earth to see what conditions are like so we can properly size our footings. Underground pipe inspections are done at north, and that's to make sure that we're reusing the proper sanitary and storm lines and they don't need replacing. Middle school, north asbestos, you see the abatement's already underway there, and that demolition bid I just mentioned. And then kind of cool is an asset auction that we wrapped up just a few days ago. We literally sold the cabinetry from the teacher's lounge. We had some surplus, furniture and equipment. And for those of you that don't know, we had an empty Pine Lake Elementary School, which served as a warehouse. We had an empty Hickory Grove Elementary School that served as a warehouse. Then we had a warehouse at Physical Plant Services, which is now Model High School. And then we had empty Losser, which served as a warehouse. And so we had to sell and get rid of a lot of stuff. And we are moving into a new space that we're leasing over off of Franklin Road, and the warehousing space there is just not as small, is not as large as what we were accustomed to. So we were able to clean house and sell things. And you probably remember that in the bond, near the end of the bond, is a new transportation facility, maintenance facility, and district storage. One of the cool things about the picture in the bottom left there, where you see Barton Mello Builders and the entry, and you can see a soil boring machine in action, Jason Rubel actually has changed his commute to work to drive by the front of this building every morning so he can check on progress. So that's kind of a cool little picture there. Next slide. That's it for me.